papers ever since Archive was created, which is some 20 years ago. Of course, we're a multidisciplinary journal. We all know that preprinting has taken off more recently in the life sciences than even more recently in biomedical sciences. And so while we used to be just supportive of our authors depositing preprints, now we actually actively encourage them. And when the COVID pandemic started, we actually mandated deposition of preprints for all COVID-related papers at the point of submission to us, because we wanted that information to be available without any delay. We encourage, and in some fields mandate, data deposition. Without that, we will not publish your papers. We include a compulsory data availability statement in every paper to increase transparency around this. We encourage code sharing and facilitate code peer review via Code Ocean, who is an independent organization with which we partnered, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. We encourage protocol sharing. For example, we have Nature protocols, but we're completely agnostic as to which platform you share your protocols through. In the interest of transparency, which I see very much related to open research and open science, we offer transparent peer review, whereby reviewers' comments and authors' responses are published with the published article. The way it works on Nature is that the authors have an opportunity to veto, so have an opportunity to opt out. All reviewers who review for us know that unless the authors opt out, their referees' comments will be published with a published paper. Within the Nature portfolio, this practice started with Nature Communications quite some time ago, and very recently they actually extended their transparent peer review model to be mandatory. So you cannot, as an author at Nature Communications, you cannot now opt out. And then just a word, maybe not so directly related to open research, but given the forum we're in here, we across the journals work with early career researchers in mentorship programs around peer review for a number of reasons. One is that we want to diversify our peer review pools. We want a diversity of opinions on research that we consider for publication. And another one, actually, we want to share the expertise that editors gain through managing round after round of peer review, and share that with early career researchers who may just be starting out on their journey. So just a few examples, and I will run through this quite quickly. So indeed, back in 2019, we changed our policy to encourage authors to deposit preprints at submission, and that's actually a Springer Nature-wide policy, not just for Nature on the Nature portfolio. As I mentioned already, we facilitate data peer review and sharing. So I mentioned earlier that we encourage, and in some fields we mandate, and the reason why I say in some fields, because of course you represent a diversity of fields, of disciplines. You know that different disciplines are at a different stage towards practicing data sharing, and one of the aspects that determines which stage you're at is infrastructure. So for example, my original discipline in which I did research and on which I focused for many years as an editor, genomics, has a fantastic infrastructure for data sharing, and in genomics we mandate data sharing. So we will not publish a paper without shared data in these papers. Now there are disciplines in which there are no structured repositories for data. There are in fact many of those disciplines. And so we've worked together with Figshare, which is an unstructured repository, and we've actually now developed a way to enable Figshare data deposition as part of the submission process to one of our journals. So to help support the authors to share the data. And the data will then sit in the Springer Nature part of Figshare, and the data will remain there whether the paper is published with Springer Nature, with a Springer Nature journal or not. So, and it gets a DOI, it can be cited, it's a permanent record, it's an independent record in Figshare. And so this just goes through this example in more detail. And of course, it enables two things. It enables, because this deposition of data happens, it enables viewers to more appropriately review data, to get data that is immediately available there. And at this point, if the authors choose to do so, these data can be available only for reviewers until the paper is published. And then indeed, of course, after publication, if the permissions need to be reset, they will be reset. The data set remains and is linked with the publication and the paper. Analogously, we want to support code sharing. Of course, code sharing does not, or the usage of code in publication does not apply to every single paper, but it does apply increasingly to many different aspects of research. So quite some time as a pilot, we have partnered with an organization called CodeOcean. CodeOcean provides an environment, if you like, a container tool in which your code can be run on the appropriate data set. This capsule is then presented to the reviewers. So analogously to the way I was talking about the data, this code can be reviewed in the environment in which it can run on the data that are suitable. And then when the paper is published, again, this capsule is published with the paper. So then the readers can play around with it, play with the parameters, understand the process, that the analysis that the authors went through to arrive at their conclusions. So I mentioned a few things which are listed on this slide, such as, for example, data and code availability already. I mentioned protocol sharing, which is, of course, an important aspect of open science. Another aspect of open science, which, again, to me, very much links with research integrity and reproducibility of research, is the support that we provide to authors through our reporting summaries. So these are reporting summaries which have been developed with the research communities to prompt the authors to report the parameters with which they've done their research, and then in turn, for the reviewers and the readers, help them sort of at a glance or easily evaluate the rigor with which the research was done. And I want to just spend a couple of words speaking of transparency. We don't just want to require transparency of our authors. We want our own processes to have an element of transparency as well. So we have, back in 2020, we have started a trial on Nature to publish referee reports, just as I mentioned Nature Communications did before. And the trial has ended in the sense that we have now adopted this. Majority of our authors are happy to have the referee reports published. I should just say that this does not mean that the referee reports are signed. So that still remains at the discretion of the reviewer. They can choose whether to sign their reports or not, but their reports, the actual text and the rebuttals will be available. Incidentally, to acknowledge the reviewers, we do thank them by name if they choose to be named, or anonymously at the end of the manuscript. So we insert a sort of thank you note, and that's not at the discretion of the author. So we want to thank the reviewers, but whether they're named or not is down to them. Part of the open research practice, I think, is, as well as transparency, is also the fairness of it. I talked about this yesterday, so I won't talk about it again. Just very briefly, again, about open science and transparency and rigor, which are very closely linked in my mind. I want to just mention retractions, extremely contentious topic, which shouldn't be, in my view. All too often, retractions are viewed as being synonymous with lack of research rigor, whereas most majority of retractions are not because of scientific fraud, for some other reasons. And here I'm just showing you an example of how a retraction can add to transparency of research. A particular paper associated with the retraction note. The retraction note itself explains the whole process that led to the retraction, linking to the discussion of archive between the authors, but also members of the community. And subsequently, this paper actually subsequently was published in another journal. I think that's an important illustration of transparent and open scientific practice. And in closing, I will mention again something I mentioned in my talk yesterday, and that is help with the cost of publishing. We talked a lot about the cost of publishing in the first part of the session. And so indeed, earlier this year, I think it was earlier this year, Springer Nature announced a fund to cover the cost of APCs in Nature and the research journals in the Nature portfolio, and that applies to the countries that are defined as low and middle income countries as defined by the World Bank. And the final thing I will mention is, in the earlier presentations, we talked about, or panelists talked about, alternative ways of getting access to publications which are not open access. And Sci-Hub featured on the list, and yet Research for Life didn't. And I find it quite curious that, let's face it, an illegal operation can create so much PR for itself that a completely legal collaborative effort, which Research for Life is, in which many publishers participate, including Springer Nature, so all of Springer Nature's content, which is not open access, is completely freely available in low and middle income countries through Research for Life. Nobody in this group I have spoken to about this knows about Research for Life, and yet it's not a new organization. It's quite interesting for me, and I clearly have no interest in promoting Research for Life, apart from the fact that content in my journal is available through Research for Life, for example, to researchers in Rwanda. And similarly, so it's not just our content, but it's also our training. So we have Nature Masterclasses, which is an extensive process of training available online on how to write papers, how to review papers, how to write grants, et cetera, et cetera. And all these masterclasses, the whole program is freely available in low and middle income countries through Research for Life. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Hi, it's really great to be here at the Global Young Academy Annual General Meeting. It's a fantastic audience. It's a great group of people. I am delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you about our experiences at PLOS and increasing equitable participation in open science. So for those of you who may not know, PLOS is a nonprofit, fully open access science publisher. We have a mission to empower researchers to accelerate the progress in research transformation by accelerate progress in scholarly communication by leading a transformation in research communication. We strive for openness and transparency throughout the research communication lifecycle because we know that there are benefits to knowledge dissemination, and we also appreciate how openness and transparency support trust in research. So, just the arrow key. So I want to start today with the definition of open science, which is we use the UNESCO definition in our work. It has equitable participation baked into its very core. So it defines open science as a combination of practices that contribute to making knowledge more available, more accessible, and more reproducible. And open science applies to all disciplines, not just those in STEM fields, and it highlights points that are really central to PLOS's approach to open access publishing. So from its inception in 2000, PLOS has been focused on catalyzing broad-scale systemic change in scholarly communication. And what we have learned is that change is possible. And over the past 20 years, we've been able to prove the viability of open access models, which is now mainstream for many publishers. And via My Journal PLOS Fund, we've shown that we've actually catalyzed change in the publishing landscape by showing that a multidisciplinary journal that prioritizes rigor and ethics over kind of the hotness or the excitement of the research findings is a viable strategy. So we've also helped focus the conversation about peer review on rigor and transparency, and we've also demonstrated the importance of openly available data through our mandatory data deposition policy. But along the way, we've also learned important lessons about building an equitable open access publishing system. And the first and probably the most important to this group, as judging by conversations that I've heard already, is around the article processing charges or the article publication charges. We know that these are exclusionary. We know that they represent a barrier to inclusion in knowledge sharing. We've also learned over the past 20 years that intermediary outputs like data and code, protocols, reviewer reports, these all have intrinsic value and they should be shared. We've also learned that it's really important to focus on the research question and the quality by which that research was executed instead of subjective assessments of results. And so addressing these three things that we've learned, we feel is key to building an equitable system of open access publishing. So I want to talk about the APC first, the giant elephant in the room. So we need to move beyond the APC. It's a business model that's focused on just one output, which is the research paper, and it's the predominant model right now in open access publishing. But it's not appropriate for selected titles because the costs are too high, and it limits the availability for authors who can't afford to pay APCs that are thousands of dollars. So at PLOS, we've developed a couple of different solutions to this, and this is an area of active experimentation and active investment in PLOS. The first solution here is CAP, which is Community Action Publishing, and it's offered on our more selective titles, including PLOS Biology, PLOS Medicine, and PLOS Sustainability and Transformation. And so what CAP is a one annual fee that offers unlimited publishing in these three titles. The fee is based on the publishing activity of an institution, and the profit margin is capped. The other publishing model that we've recently developed over the past 2 years is one called Global Equity. And this is an annual publication fee, and that's based on the World Bank lending tier plus the institutional's historic publication output. The Global Equity model is capped at $6,600, again, for an institution, so that one fee for an institution is $6,600. That allows unlimited publishing, and that's only in the highest World Bank lending tiers with the most publishing activity. And I should also note that, as Magdalena mentioned, researchers who are in Research for Life countries have access to both of these models for free. So there is no APC, there is no paperwork, there's nothing, they're just automatically included in both of these models for free. So in the same way that we are trying to uncouple payment of an article to improve access and equity, we're also moving away from the idea that publishing is a one-time event that ends in a published article. So we're supporting a publication process that better mirrors how research is actually conducted. And this is things through registered reports, which were mentioned yesterday again by Magdalena, where the protocol is reviewed, you get detailed reviewer comments, and then you receive an accepting principle for that study. We also, encourage preprint deposition. We obviously publish peer-reviewed articles, and we also publish reviewer reports if the authors elect to make them openly available. We support, in fact, mandate data sharing and support code sharing for other journals. We offer ability to publish methods and protocols, and then obviously we also have a really robust post-publication correction and retraction process as well. And excitingly, we also have new ways to update papers in some of our journals after the paper is accepted for publication. So what this all means is that we have like a linked digital stack of contributions. It's not just one static article, and each contribution here is then independently citable, it's reusable, and it can be shared more broadly. So the third pillar in building a more equitable ecosystem is how we evaluate research, right? So especially research that's submitted to selected journals. So we'll talk about PLOS One first. PLOS One is not a selected journal, right? We aim to be a home for all rigorously conducted and ethically sound research. But we've also taken steps to change how research is evaluated by introducing a couple of new article types. We rolled out registered report protocols and registered reports a couple of years ago. And more recently, we've also launched study protocols. And these publication outputs allow authors to get feedback on their study at a very early stage. and can potentially improve the chances, especially with registered reports where you get the accept in principle, can potentially improve the chances that research is then published. But it's also an independent, citable output that shows the community what you're interested in working on, opens up opportunities for collaboration, and can be cited and documented in future work. But we've also found that inclusive publication criteria are possible for selective journals. I'll give the example of PLOS Biology here. So selectivity has contributed to the replication crisis in biomedicine because we judge research on how hot, how exciting the results are, rather than whether or not the approach is solid for some fields, and whether or not the question is one that deserves to be answered. So PLOS Biology is moved to focus on the contribution that the research question makes to science, whether the research question addresses something that's important to the field, and also whether the approach that's outlined is appropriate. And so using kind of those three metrics, they've changed how they evaluate research. PLOS Bio has also launched a couple of new article types that help support this. They, like PLOS One, have the registered reports. They call them the pre-registered research articles. They also have discovery reports, which are shorter, and then update articles, which I mentioned briefly before, where you can go in and update a previous paper that was published in Bio. So overall, open science supports equity in publishing via these steps here that are on the slide. It supports these transparent processes with credit for authors, and very clearly delineated contributions that authors have made to the final article. Open science supports the use of preprints to share information at an early stage, and open peer review so that reviewers are recognized for the contributions that they make, and people can see how the review has contributed to improving the final article. Open science allows access to multiple research outputs like data and code, and protocols, reagents, and reporting checklists. These are all critical to supporting reproducibility and improving trust in published output. Open science also counters publication bias with, as I mentioned just previously, the pre-registration of research articles and also pre-registration of clinical trials, which is really important. And also we publish journals that have inclusive criteria like PLOS One, and several of our other new launches are also based on that same model. So I've talked so far about the role that journal policies and initiatives have in promoting equitable open access publishing, but I also want to acknowledge the important function of journal leadership and the community that we build around the journal. These have really important roles in driving and sustaining equitable publishing practices. And I feel like this quote from Naomi Oreskes illustrates it really beautifully. She mentions that objectivity is likely to be maximized when there are recognized and robust avenues for criticism, such as peer review, when the community is open, non-defensive, and responsive to criticism, and when the community is sufficiently diverse that a broad range of views can be developed, heard, and appropriately considered. So I really want to push on this diversity bit here. So why is diversity important? Well, we know that journals aren't inclusive, and there's lots, there's demonstrated evidence about bias and lack of inclusivity at every single step, from the composition of our editorial boards to reviewer practices. And the Institute of Physics has just done a really wonderful set of studies into bias and peer review, where they've looked at the effect of masking on reviewers, either double masking or single masking, and how that actually affects the outcome during review. So improving diversity and equity at all levels of the journal, it's really important to address this. So researchers have always driven our mission forward, and in order for us to have a meaningful impact, we have to include the broadest range of voices possible. So the 5 journals that we launched in 2021 create new and diverse communities of practice, and they're really at the forefront of shaping how we address some of the most pressing issues that face our societies today. So here are the 5 journals that we launched in 2021, kind of based on some of the Sustainable Development Goals. These journals, and we're working with our established journals as well, they ensure diversity and equity of representation at all levels, from the editors-in-chief to the editorial boards to the reviewers that we invite to review papers. And this practice then positions the journal to actively seek out research from underrepresented and historically excluded groups. Another key is improving diversity and equity at the authorship level. So this is a pretty striking map here that shows that kind of distorts the well-known world map based on the research output. And you can see that there are a couple of countries here on this map that really dominate the research landscape. So what we aim to do is to work with impacted communities, as I mentioned, the historically excluded communities, underrepresented communities, to understand their barriers to access, and also then to co-create solutions with them. So we're not imposing a top-down solution, we're trying to understand, which is part of the reason why I'm at this meeting. So part of this work involves the models that I discussed previously, the CAP and global equity models. So these are models that work with the community to improve upon access. But I also want to give an example of how we work with communities to develop solutions to other barriers to access. And so one of these is our inclusivity and global research policy, which we announced in September 2021. And this is a policy that was designed to address helicopter neocolonial research, where researchers from another country come in, work with the local population, and leave publishing the research without including contributions from local researchers. And it also speaks to the tendency for science to be published in journals without appropriate consultation with local groups who would benefit from knowledge creation. So with this policy, we just aim to improve the transparency of the reporting of research. And it very specifically asks authors conducting the research that don't have local authors in the author list, why none have been included. And that might be a tough question for some authors to be able to address. And really, really importantly, this policy was co-created with local research communities. So we sought feedback from diverse global perspectives in many, many, many different fields. And they provide really key feedback in shaping how we develop the policy, how we implement the policy, and the checks the journal run. Make sure that the policy is being met. So I want to just finish here on, how do we build an equitable open access publishing system? So we need new publishing models that decouple publishing activity from payment, that are equitable and that are transparently costed, so that people understand what the profit is, what is the money going to pay for. We need to recognize the intrinsic value of the intermediary outputs like data and code, preprints, review reports, and protocols. We need to develop publication criteria and outputs that focus on the research question and quality of the execution rather than subjective assessments of results. We need to build diverse, inclusive, equitable communities around journals, and we need to partner with our journal community to understand and address their needs. And that's my last slide. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to be representing eLife as the ambassador. So my name is Dini Roslin. I work as a social scientist and a public health specialist here in Rwanda. I am also an eLife ambassador, and that's why I'm here today. I'm also the co-founder of African Community for Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. So as eLife, our aim is to promote transparency, fairness in science. And so eLife, for the past 10 years, has been publishing like other journals such as PLOS. Today, we have a model since the beginning of this year, 2023, where we only publish articles that have been pre-printed. So our goal is to have a consultative model where the reviewer and the authors are kind of collaborating together for them to have the feeling on what the paper is all about. That is, we want to focus more on the public view of the science. So editors decide which preprint we are going to review based on the public preference. So I'm going to walk us through the process as it's here. So the first step is to submit your article or your manuscript with eLife. But it has to be pre-printed. It doesn't necessarily mean that your article must have been pre-printed. you can still submit with eLife, and eLife is going to preprint it for you. eLife works with archives, preprint archives such as African Archive, and also works with pre-review. And pre-review is an organization that helps us to review articles that have been submitted as preprint. And the next step is to have a consultative peer review process where the public gives you the thoughts on what they feel about your article. And after that, the editors from eLife also write an assessment of what they think are the public thoughts of this article in a lay language that everyone can understand. The aim is not to provide you a review, but the aim is to communicate with you how the public feels about your article, and also creates room for you to improve on the manuscripts submitted. So for the publication process, once eLife has received your article and has reviewed it and given you an assessment form, it takes about 2 weeks for the author to decide what step to take. You're free to resubmit your article after 2 weeks, and you are also free to decide what happens with your article. How is this being done? You read the feedback. If you're happy with it, then you can decide whether you want to take the article and submit to another journal, or you want to submit it with eLife. And if you decide to submit it with eLife, eLife is going to generate what we call a version of records and give it a deal. But if you decide to take it to another journal, it's all up to you. The publication process is left to the hands of the authors. eLife is at the middle of the process, helping you to get your paper up to standards that is appreciated by the public. So the author is in control, is in charge here, and once you have a version of record, it's being published in eLife and submitted, given an eLife deal, and it's also being indexed in indexing houses such as PubMed. So eLife continues to publish just preprints. You can get more from the link. And how eLife wants to promote, we understand that we are not yet doing more, and our capacity is still limited. So that is why we have invested in promoting, increasing our area of interest by calling for editors in the context of Africa, so that we can increase our work in this part of the world. So our model is simply like a human-centered approach, where, as I can describe it, where we work with the reviewer and the authors and the editors to have a final decision. The decision is not made by the journal. Thank you. This is my short presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I feel honored to be moderating here. I mean, I knew the speakers were good, but also listening to what I had to say, I feel even more. And even yesterday, we had a chance to have a lunch with the editors, and there were a few useful comments for this panel. I'm going to open the floor. Just give me a couple of minutes to summarize the ideas that gathered through those presentations. And just about, there is one thing that was, I think for me, the elephant in the room, and it was not mentioned, which is money. So the thing is, all this is very nice, but how and where are we going to pay for that? And I like very much a comment that we got, not today, but yesterday at lunch with Magdalena, saying, well, there is enough money in the industry to keep going. It's just that it's not always evenly and kind of properly distributed. So that was a very important point. It's like, how can we, it's not about not having money, but how can we reallocate the money that goes from one place to the other in a way that makes publishing and open access and open science easier for, all over the places. Because there are some places that are the kind of the monopoly, not the monopoly, but they have very, very strong financial incentives, and there are some others that are not. And in this I would also include, we talk a lot about the south of the world, but even if I go not very far, if I go to Eastern Europe, I know that my colleagues, I also work in Estonia, and I know that there we don't have incentives to publish. So whenever I publish as an Irish, we have money from libraries, we have money from wherever to publish open access. Whenever I want to, if ever I wanted to publish as an Estonian, there will be no money. And I'm not even going down to countries that are considered kind of low income. Estonia is considered kind of north of the world because we are in the EU and so on. But this is already a first obstacle. The third thing is, and this affects, of course, more young researchers, established researchers that are kind of broader collaborations, but this is a general concern. The third thing is profit for profit. We have here representative of kind of associations that are non-for-profit and for-profit. And if you have an organization which is for-profit, no matter how you kind of turn it, there is also the people that contributed to create it, they're also interested in profit. So how can we conciliate this desire of making money with the desire of giving a kind of high-level product and the desire to give accessibility and equitability in the industry? The second thing is about prestige and representation, because in the board for +1, it was very interesting. I was just to give you my own VAs. So there were representatives of various universities, and first of all, I noticed there was a university I didn't know, and I was like, wow, must be good. Sounds like US, which I wouldn't do if the university was based somewhere else. So the question is, if you take editors, if you take people from, if you try to be as inclusive as possible, can we modify our internal PAs, saying, well, even if this is from a country I don't know anything about, even if it is a university I don't know anything about, I cannot assume, I cannot take for granted that it's going to be lower quality than something else. And this is a process that, I'm the first one to be blamed. So, that's why I'm sharing this, because I think this is a very natural thing, it's a very human thing to classify things. Ranking in a certain hierarchy. And this is the way we grow up. And are we able now to change this kind of hierarchy? Are we able to kind of to look at the world in a more kind of equitable way? And the last thing was mentioned in the first part of the panel by Luciana, and it was about evaluation. How can we hope to push new models that could be more equitable, that could be more open, if those models are not recognized by the bodies that are supposed to evaluate our work? So this is, again, it's a huge work. You can see that it should be conducted in parallel and should be conducted on all fronts. But this is the complexity. This gives you a kind of very small overview on the complexity of the issue, which is not just about open science versus non-open science, money versus non-money, prestige versus non-prestige, but it's about, once you do this, how can you convince the evaluating bodies that what you're doing actually has value? We still talk of excellence in science, just like my research was more important than your research. And it's like, to me, there is only good science and not good science. Good science, I'm using a scientific method to produce some conclusions that are based on a solid methodology and interpretation. And then if it's more important or less important depends mostly on the fashion at that moment. What is more fashionable in terms of what has more impact in terms of kind of policy, in terms of visibility. But this shouldn't, and then the European Commission keeps on promoting this idea of excellence. It is like, if I am excellent, you are not excellent? Who is going to say that? And there's like kind of we have this, what's the name? Kind of high performing region and lower performing region, just like producing more in Germany means that they are better than Estonia or better than Latvia in terms of numbers. And it's like we just keep on producing academic junk because we have to recycle and produce more to show that our countries are producing more. And it's like, my model is like, you just submit one article a year for the evaluation. They read it actually, instead of assuming that it was a good one because it was in a good journal. And that will give you an idea of how performative was the the, the research. So starting from those ones, I'd like to open the floor to anyone who wants to ask questions, comment. Yeah, we see a few of them. Do we have a mic? How does, yeah, the microphone is coming.
Hi, I'm Anina from Australia. Thank you very much. It was really useful to have all three of those presentations. I actually have a question for Rosaline. I think the new model for eLife is a really exciting step change. And I wonder how, I think it's great that it's being experimented with, whether or not we can actually shift enough away from sort of a traditional model successfully. I wondered how eLife kind of is managing the additional load for reviewers, because now it's not a single shot and then maybe look at a revision, it's like an interactive process. And I wondered about the curation of who the public is who is making those comments that then guide how that paper goes path. So how do we ensure that there's equity in who's making those, it's no longer the journal and the editor, I understood that, but I wonder how much the people who are selected for doing that is being taken into account to ensure that we also have diversity in that sort of part of it. And sorry, I have a third one. Can I squeeze it in? I also wondered how we might ensure that the interaction with the metrics that we're all being measured on, no longer, I have an eLife publication and that's a great thing on my CV. How do we make sure that the value of a paper getting to that end stage without having that eLife accepted my paper is still really highly valued and understood by the people who are measuring our careers and giving us grants? Sorry for having so many.
Can you hear? Hello? Okay, great. Can you repeat the first question, please?
I was asking about how you manage the additional load for reviewers, because now it's not just one time I review the paper for eLife and then perhaps have one revision, possibly two revisions, but now it's like this interactive process. I know, I guess this comes from the fact that when I've reviewed in the past for Frontiers, it was like reviewing 6 papers for one, because there was so much back and forth, and it actually influenced, apart from some other things about like costs and stuff, it influences how many papers I'm willing to review. So I wondered how eLife is approaching that additional load for reviewers of that interactive process.
Thank you. At eLife, once an assessment form has been conducted and submitted shared with the authors, we expect them to react to it after 2 weeks. And if they don't react to it after 2 weeks, we have to take a decision. And once they react to it within the given time frame, we give them, we publish the paper in our website, again for additional comment. But eLife also decides based on the interaction between the authors and the editors if they should give it another review. Speaking about who the public is, we work with pre-review, and pre-review is another institution that basically serves like an intermediary between reviewing preprints for the public. So once we always recommend authors to submit their preprint to any archive, and then from there we try to get them through other means such as pre-review, and pre-review makes it easier for the public, anyone. When I speak about the public, it means it can be posted through social media channels such as LinkedIn and Twitter. You and I, anyone who has skills in that domain can, if you're interested, then you can review the article. There are also some groups, such as SCIETY, that review these articles. There is an institution called SCIETY. They form some clubs and groups and people who are interested, for instance, in life sciences, in this part of science, they review this article and provide their feedback, and their names are being written. So eLife's report also comes with the list of the names of those who have reviewed your article, and you have to determine if you are happy with the review process or not. It's all left to the author to tell. It's back and forth. I'm sorry, I missed out the last question again. Sorry. Being accepted by eLife?
If I understood correctly, at the end there's no, oh, you've had a paper accepted by eLife because it's published the way through. So I wonder how we can make sure that the people assessing our CVs understand what that means, because it's not as simple as saying this journal accepted my paper.
Okay, what we normally do is eLife editors are experts whom we give them, we kind of trust them, and we believe that what they are going to say is going to be actually what the public appreciates about the paper, also what the authors think, because for the paper to be publicly reviewed with different perspective, it actually has the importance, the value that the population give to that article. So it is a kind of three-way review, and so at the end of it, if we have reached a particular point and both the author, the editors, and the public feel that this is it, then we have the authors decide whether they want to publish it with eLife or they want to take it to another journal. It is not eLife that makes the decision where the article has to be published. It's all left to the author. Thank you.
Hi. First of all, let me congratulate the eLife team, because they have come up with some out-of-box idea for the publishing. So my question is to Skipper and Emily, that what are your views on this particular model of eLife, and what do you think that how the Stringent Nature or the +1 are going to adopt this in future? Is there any possibility, is there any discussion on that? Because I think it's a kind of very disruptive idea.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm on there. Thanks for the question. Let me answer it from Nature's perspective, because that's easiest, since this is my journal. Springer Nature publishes many journals, and of course my jurisdiction does not extend that far. Nature is not considering at the moment adopting this approach. And the reason why while I appreciate the value of this approach, as I do appreciate value of other approaches, by training I'm a life scientist. For me, any ecosystem is only going to be healthy if it's diverse. So we need to have a diversity of solutions to whatever we do, and here we're discussing publishing, diversity of choices and options. I think it's great that we have different options. We of course have preprinting alone, and in some disciplines which are moving particularly fast, many researchers choose not to publish in a journal per se. And interestingly, when I think about eLife's recent decision, I'm sort of conceptualizing it as blurring that distinction between a preprint server and a journal, because of course we also have peer review of preprints, so it sort of becomes a continuum as opposed to a distinction. And that's a really interesting evolution to our ecosystem. But I say at the moment at Nature we're not considering it. But at this stage in life, I will say never say never.
And if I can,
May I ask?
can I just add briefly to that? And I think as Magdalena alluded to, I think the idea of disruption in scholarly communication is one that we embrace and that we support, and it's really exciting to see the innovation that's happening over at eLife and other publishers to try to move to a more equitable, more transparent system of publishing. And again, I'm going to speak personally, that my views don't necessarily represent where PLOS in general is heading. I think my chief concern around the way the model is currently executed is one around gatekeeping, where the initial decision is made by one of a handful of editors without any other feedback from the community about whether or not to review the preprint. And I feel like that could, I'm sure that every single person who's involved in any journal anywhere is doing their absolute best, but I worry that, in a situation where we don't have a diversity of viewpoints, especially with multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary work, that we could be kind of reinforcing some silos around where we perceive research to be important. So I am of the viewpoint that getting additional feedback on papers before they're published, before they're made, before we make decisions about whether or not to publish them, I think is still a model that I would embrace.
Okay, concerning the diversity of our preprints, eLife is currently working towards that, and we are planning to review our model, the beginning, the phase on how we accept the preprint, and we are also looking at ways in which we can promote diversity and representation in other parts of the world, and one of it is already a call for editors in Africa. We're looking forward to have more editors from this part of the world, and also eLife is also forming an advisory committee group for the Global South, targeting other parts of the world that are less represented. And these two initiatives will also promote diversity in our model. Thank you.
Just one thing we have. I see many hands here. I understand the session should finish at 12, right? So what I would suggest is that we take all the questions together, the last round. Let them answer, and then the rest is going to be discussed, kind of in the break, because I don't want to feed into into the next session, which will be not good for the next speakers. So can we have a quick round of final questions, and then everything else can be continued? Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for the panel. Actually, when I hear about open science, as a scientist coming from Iran, I always see the effect of sanctions, and nobody really pay attention that much how sanctions can take away your freedom to open access to the journals, to publishing, or even applying for the grants for reasons that's not really clear, because as far as I know, I'm aware we don't have scientific sanctions. So whatever it is, it's just political and economic. And I just always wondered that how these sanctions can affect science, which was not written explicitly that should be goals on that. And whenever I talk with the people, they are saying that we are proactive to see that maybe that's going to affect. But the point is that, and as a person who lived under sanction for 20 years and also as a scientist, of course that has a lot of effect on my life personally and as a scientist. I'm just saying that if there's going to be extra pressure from the side, which is not going to be a consequences for these, publishing places or universities. So I'm going to deal with that. So that's always my main question. Where are the freedom of the academia in the case of the open science and under the sanctions, especially now that we hear about the war in Ukraine, that scientists from Belarus and Russia explicitly considered under the scientific sanction, which makes me really sad. So this is one of the topics that should be paid attention, because in the future we are going to lose our freedom in academia and also the science that has no borders. Thank you.
Yeah, next one.
Yeah, I mean, if I could, no, yeah, please.
Very much. My name is Godwin from Uganda, Makerere University. I have a couple of comments and questions. The first one is about the inclusivity of the PLOS journals. If you asked me, I personally think it's a very wonderful idea. I was just wondering if the journals evaluated this approach to see what impact it's having. Are you getting feedback from, let's say, the people that you're involving from countries or regions that were initially not represented or underrepresented? Then I know people have been talking about reviewer overload, and in East Africa, here we have the East African Health Research Commission that runs a couple of journals, and I'm impressed that they actually offer a modest incentive to reviewers, which has actually been talked about, the issue of the elephant in the room. There is money, but it's not actually getting distributed equitably, and that should be a concern. And then I think there is an issue of editor overload as well. So as we talk about reviewer overload, we should also bear in mind that there could be editorial overload. Thank you.
Okay, Ben was there?
Yeah, I will try to make this brief. And my question comes on the back of that question and talking about money and funding, and I found it very interesting. Abel, when you talked about the distribution of funding, as if there is plenty of money, but where does it go? And so I'm looking at some facts and figures now. For example, sorry, I do not have the facts and figures for eLife, but for Plus One in 2021, the total revenues were $34.1 million, and then the operating costs were $32.5 million. So there's like a $5 million kind of profit margin for a nonprofit. So I'm interested in, of course, where this money goes. And then for Springer, so Springer's revenues were $1.4 billion. And then, let's see, but the actual revenue after operating costs were, according to Statista, $590 million in revenue. And then according to the Springer website, okay, 300 million of that supposedly goes to innovation and technology to make processes smoother, more efficient. And I know that, yeah, you are not the financiers of your institutions, but it does beg to question, where does the money go? And so then the second question would be, as a scientist, I would like to hear you convince me to publish with you, to spend money to publish with you, when you already have such incredible profit margins. When I could find another low threshold publisher, good quality, to publish with open access instead.
Thank you. I think it's done.
Can I have one question? Hello, thank you for the panel. It's just a quick question. I'm going to be very brief in the terms of, I just want to raise the question about language, and especially in humanities, language is very, translating a paper, it makes it, it's something not so obvious to translate something. And I would like to challenge the fact that that English is the language of science. So does that mean that if it's not in English, is it not science? And I would like to just to raise that question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for all the panel, for the great talk. I'm Ignana from Cameroon. I'm incoming GYA member. I really appreciated the transparent peer review process by Springer Nature, and I would like to know if you have maybe evaluate the impact of that transparent peer review, because I am also a member of the BMC Infectious Disease Board, and sometimes when we send or when the reviewer accepts to review a paper, you receive sometimes, I would say, poor review that cannot really help improve the quality of the paper. So I'm wondering whether this process was evaluated and if you have any feedback that can be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think there's, yeah, I know. So I'll give just, because the question was very general somewhere, so I'll just give a short response. I mean, it's just time to respond to each of you. I won't limit you, but you know that we are running out of time, so it's up to you. Yeah, we can go, whatever, the same one.
Okay, since I'm sitting closest to the chair. So very quick comment on the sanctions. We have made an editorial decision that editorially we do not honor sanctions. So we publish papers from authors based in Iran and we publish papers from authors based in Russia. We obviously don't have any financial transactions with them because that cannot happen. But editorially, we exactly made the decision to overcome that in the spirit of what you talked about, that science should not follow sanctions as they exist. So just a very quick comment to this. Then very briefly, I'll comment on two other points which I think I can make shorter comments on. There was one question which would take me several hours to respond to. You know who you are. But on the language, I think that's an excellent question. And very clearly, if it's not done in English, it is science. If it is science, science itself should be agnostic of the language. I don't have an answer to it because, you know, if you submit, I know you're based in Brazil, if you submit your paper to me in Portuguese, I can't deal with it today. But I wonder whether actually AI tools are an answer to this, because of course it will work in both ways. It will help you read a paper in any language that you're not familiar with, and it will help me evaluate that paper and publish it again. So sort of a prospective answer there. On the question about transparency of peer review, we have not done a systematic assessment of the quality of peer review. It would be difficult to make it quantitative, but from a qualitative perspective, there is a difference. There's a difference in how constructive the review is, but from my perspective as an editor, the most significant difference is in the tone of the review. If you know that your report is going to be published, you're automatically more respectful, which you would hope that you would be respectful to your colleagues regardless of whether your comments are going to be published or not. But of course, you know, one thing we can't forget is that we're all human, and therefore we're not perfect. So I think in that respect, the discourse has become more civil, let's put it this way, and more focused on constructive comments. So that, to your excellent question, why should you publish with me? So as an editor, my answer is not going to be related to the money. One of the things that, you know, just as I said that editorially we're able to rise above the sanctions and not adhere to them, one of the reasons why I enjoy working for Nature and previously for other publications, previously Macmillan Publishers and now Springer Nature, is because there's always been a very clear-cut distinction between the business side of the business and the editorial side of publishing, of my role. So I'm going to try and convince you on an editorial basis. And my argument, very briefly, is going to be about the kind of engagement you can have with me or one of the editors on my team or my colleagues on other Nature portfolio journals. How much support you're going to get, how much feedback you're going to get, the tools that I talked about in terms of practicing open science, that interaction, all of that has been developed in the context, in the collaboration with the relevant communities. And so it's a form of partnership. I know that a number of journals simply cannot afford, and by that I mean financially, but also, you know, time is money, right? So all of this feeds together. As much as they would want to, they can't afford to provide that level of interaction and engagement. So that will be the basis of my answer, and I'm very happy to continue it over coffee. Thank you.
Thanks. I am going to very artfully pirouette away from the conversation about money, but look forward to engaging with you on a one-to-one basis or over lunch about this, because I think it's really worth discussing this in more detail, and I'm happy to do that. For this, I just wanted to pick on the two questions about reviewer overload and academic editor overload, because these are things that obviously as a journal editor, I see every single day. And so kind of in the conversation that we had about money, it's like there's money exists, it's just not allocated appropriately. I also find that with reviewers. We have even reviewers, they exist, they're just not being put on the right papers. So we had an initiative that started about a year ago called the Open Reviewer Gateway, where reviewers could opt in, saying, hey, I'm a potential reviewer, I'd love to be involved in reviewing papers. We thought, we might get 20, 100 signups. We got like 2,000 signups in a matter of months. These reviewers agree to handle papers at much higher frequency than when you just cold call members of the academic community, and they return really great reports on time. And so this is something that we're going to try to make a little bit more formal so that we can really capitalize on the enthusiasm that's out there. But I think another key point to avoiding reviewer overload is making sure that we only send papers for review that actually have some chance of getting published. This also speaks to the academic editor overload as well. PLOS ONE, our reputation. We publish a lot of things. We get over 100 submissions every single day. Every single one of those submissions is read by an actual human being with an advanced degree in the field that's relevant to that work. And we have a really robust triage system. I mean, I joined PLOS when I worked at Nature Cell Biology. Previously to that, I worked at Veg Journal, so I had some experience in more selected journals. I was blown away by the quality of the checks that are performed on every manuscript. So when we're sending manuscripts out for review, we know that these pass basic checks about, scope, ethics. We just roll out a new policy to make sure that every manuscript that deals with research on human participants, we call in the IRB approval document. So we check that the research was performed ethically. And so we try to minimize the number of kind of, spurious science and research that's not going to be supported. And in that way, our triage steps can help prevent this reviewer and AE overload. It's not perfect, but we're working on it. Thanks.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize on the point that we don't select areas which we publish our papers. We cover everyone. Everyone is welcome to publish with or send a paper to be reviewed by eLife. And the aim is also to help authors to have their articles being understood by the general public. Thank you.
Okay, I got a few signs that we have to finish, so I won't be taking anything. It's my personal security. So feel free to continue the discussion over coffee or whatever. Thank you very much for being so constructive and so active. And I see the room is now full. So thank you very much. See you later.